Welcome. My name is Stephanie Friedman. I'm an instructional technologist and emerging technology specialist at Mount Holyoke College, which is a small liberal arts institution in the Pioneer Valley of Western Massachusetts. I'm here today to share a bit about how my work with virtual reality tools seeks to advance digital literacy and increase access to fascinating new tech for a diverse collection of students, and hopefully to give you some thinking material about how you might go about incorporating digital literacy into your own work with similar tools. I'll begin with a land acknowledgement. Mount Holyoke College is located on the ancestral land of the Nonotuck people. It is also important to acknowledge the neighboring indigenous nations who continue to be connected to the land where I am: the Nipmuc and the Wampanoag to the east, the Mohican and the Pequot to the south, the Mohican to the west, and the Abenaki to the north. I will also excerpt from the College of Charleston's land acknowledgement. I acknowledge that this conference is held on the traditional lands of the first people of Charleston, the Etiwan, Kiowa, Ediso Natchez Kuso, Santi, and Wassimasau people, also known as Varnertown Indians. I acknowledge and honor all of the indigenous people who lived, labored, and were faithful stewards of the land. I express my deep gratitude for the land and continued faithful stewardship to the next 7 generations. I also acknowledge the lives and labor of the Africans who were enslaved to build Charleston, South Carolina. On this campus and in its spaces, African and African-descended people used skilled labor in ornamental ironwork, historic architecture, and low-country agriculture and food production. I'll acknowledge the Black lives and labor that built the city and the campus. My first action item for you all, and I am going to be advancing some action items throughout this presentation, is you may be watching this video in any number of locations thanks to the power of virtual events. Please take a few minutes, by pausing the video if you like, and become familiar with the groups who you can be grateful to in your location. If that's knowledge you already have, I'd like to encourage you to come up with your own way at advancing your involvement with this practice. To speak a little to the title of my talk today, Demystify, Democratize, Diversify. Yes, I picked this triptych because the alliteration is nice, but I do want to touch on all 3 topics. New technology can be mysterious to the uninitiated. That mystery can resolve to wonder and appreciation, but it can also be intimidating. I take the stance that mystery in a technology setting is a barrier, and that demystifying can be a tool that brings people from all backgrounds closer to making true use of the tech in front of them. Understanding a technology helps users grasp how the tech can fail, and how the tech specifically can fail an individual or group in the realms of privacy, equity, and accessibility. Having this understanding can help us take action to democratize the technology, that is, work to make it available as a tool to anyone who is interested in expressing themselves through the technological medium. And working to spread this knowledge is accompanied by working to increase digital literacy by helping the new users understand how to protect their own data and privacy, while also becoming accomplished authors with the tools that they have. Diversifying who is making use of a technology means that there can be a push to make that technology truly serve everyone, instead of catering to a limited group of people. Because I work at a historically women's college, the cross-section of students who join me for VR programs is already skewed towards women and people of other marginalized genders and gender expressions. So that plays a part in dictating where I spend my energy when considering how else I can expand the range of people who have access to this technology. The rest of this video will be loosely divided into 4 parts. I'm going to begin with some general discussion about the whys of this initiative, what my implicit and explicit goals are, and how I connect them to the mission of my institution in order to further the practice. Then, I'm going to share a few examples of the way I've worked to embody these goals throughout the 2022-23 academic year. I'm going to spend some time after that focusing on the conversations about digital literacy that can happen in the moment when you're facilitating an event with virtual reality equipment. And finally, I'm going to incorporate a few last final takeaways. Building an active VR program at a small campus is a huge lift, so let's talk about how I took some big, hopeful ideas and built them into some achievable workplace goals. In particular, workplace goals that integrate with the way that my library organization sees itself operating at our institution. I'm not going to go at all into the logistics of the hardware that we have for creating virtual reality programs. We've had that hardware at my institution for a couple of years now, and really the question that I was approaching this year was how to best utilize our existing equipment rather than how to build up a base of hardware to use. So, as background, I work in a combined library IT organization that's Library Information and Technology Services on my campus, or LITS. The mission, vision, and anti-racism statements that LITS has, in addition to the mission statement of the college, are great resources that I can point towards in order to make the case for my work in this area. They're big dreams, once again, but the mission and vision statements are meant to encapsulate big dreams. I won't read them all through, but here are a few excerpts that speak to the goals that I have. Firstly, from the LITS anti-racism statement, we affirm our individual and group responsibility to identify and eliminate the structural barriers that limit the engagement, contributions, and success of individuals and groups based on identity. So this speaks to the Diversify portion of the change that I was hoping to make. From the LITS vision statement, we inspire learning, reflection, and creativity and stimulate ideas through the power of technology, discovery, and collaboration. So this is really all three parts of what I'm hoping to do. And finally, from the Mount Holyoke College mission statement, to prepare students through a liberal education, integrated curriculum, and careers for lives of thoughtful, effective, and purposeful engagement in the world. Which once again brings in these three key goals I'm talking about: the demystify, democratize, diversify. They're all there. We can make more specific connections with these principles in the realm of VR technology. Here's how I translate the broad statements into the context of my work. Get students involved with this technology on their own terms as much as possible. Provide students with the tools and training to be creators of technology in addition to consuming it. Help them envision changes, improvements, and how to express themselves in this sphere. Raise issues around accessibility, privacy rights, and other concerns that students might want to engage with in the future. Explicitly seek to involve students in marginalized communities who might be hesitant to seek out these technologies because of messages around who can succeed with them. Most importantly, these devices were paid for with student tuition, so students should have as many opportunities as possible to make use of them, for work or for play. Really, we don't judge. So, my next action item for you: have a look at the written mission and vision statements that are in play at your institution, and be able to point at them to support your actions in the areas of digital literacy and equity with emerging technologies. There will be connections that you can draw, so knowing what's written into those statements can be really useful for you. Coming from these goals, my boss and I sat down and wrote them into the specific goals that we submit with my performance evaluation every year. I won't trot out the exact details for you, but we constructed them as SMART goals, which you're probably familiar with. These are narrow, time-bound, and break down into actual tasks rather than the broad principles I've been talking about. One of the goals this year was to collaborate with a certain number of campus groups. I'll be talking about how that shook out in a moment. Another goal I had was to submit a proposal to a conference like this one in order to get the conversation going with a broader group of people off campus. Now I'm here. The goals weren't about changing the world or the entire culture of the campus, but about what one person, me, could reasonably do with a few hours per week to advance these mission-based objectives. So, another action item for you all: if you're serious about advancing diversity and digital literacy in this kind of field, get it written into your performance goals. When you make progress, even modest progress, have it be something that you can celebrate within the structures your institution uses to measure your success. Now, at this point, I want to share some of the concrete programs and outcomes that I worked on this year. There are 6 of them in total, and while they have many different aims and structures, all of these emphasize creativity, choice, and exploration for students. We find that this is a really good basis for afterwards opening doors to aspects of digital literacy and empowerment with the technology. Program number 1 was employing the Emerging Technology Fellows. Just this year, we have increased from 1 single paid student position to 3 paid student positions with the title Emerging Technology Fellow. We've been asking these students to brainstorm, plan, and build VR experiences using the WebVR framework A-Frame. They have a lot of creative latitude in their projects, but we've asked them to choose a topic that would speak to a community on our campus. And as a result, we've seen projects built around the trails that extend from our campus. We've seen projects built around a particular dorm and the culture and activities there. And we're also seeing some investigation of the science disciplines and concepts like imposter syndrome. We've hired students from across the different majors and class years on campus and use an approach where multiple members of the educational technology team assist in managing and mentoring them through their projects. When we hired into this position, we were not looking for students with pre-existing technical skills, but instead a willingness to learn. 2 of our 3 students have a background in computer science, 1 doesn't, and they've all been able to contribute different and interesting pieces to their projects that they've grown. The ultimate task we've given to them is not at all to create a polished or marketable item, but to discover what they can and find different potholes in the road of building these projects that we can then help them understand how to approach. Our hope is really that they can create teaching materials that will be accessible to their peers and thus make it more inviting to try out virtual reality applications. A small number of students gaining deep expertise and a paid experience and designing ways that they can bring their knowledge back out to the student body is something that we really think will promote excitement, exploration, and peer-to-peer learning on our campus. Program number 2 is when we run workshops. We have 2 creative workshop curricula where students dive into creating their own material for virtual reality. One workshop runs for a week over January, a week of half days, and has a colleague of mine in computer science teaching participants the tools to create levels for the popular game Beat Saber using open source technology. I also have a separate sequence of 2 shorter workshops that teach students how to approach the web VR framework A-Frame to write basic VR experiences that can be viewed from a web browser. I grouped these 2 experiences together because they invite interested students to come learn creation tools. They have very different outputs, but a same sort of philosophy going into them. In both contexts, we're encouraging students with no prior knowledge at all to experiment with the basics and learn by doing. Program number 3 is bringing the VR devices out to events run by student groups on campus. One big example was I was thrilled this past December to collaborate with the STEM POC student group, which brings together students who are self-identified as people of color in the science, technology, engineering, and math disciplines of the college. I joined them for their end of semester study event to give students an opportunity to de-stress and relax by trying out a number of different VR applications. During the afternoon that I was there, the headsets basically never went unused. Groups of the students were able to really enjoy navigating the app Wonder to show their friends around their hometowns or play a little bit of Beat Saber and really just explore with no pressure to get anything in particular done with the headsets. The ability to bring out virtual reality activities to students and make them part of campus life in a natural, casual, and fun way is one of my favorite approaches to creating these different projects. Program number 4 consists of the targeted collaborative events that we run with other centers on campus around the VR equipment. This spring, I've worked with both the Makerspace and the Language and Culture Center to bring a specific VR application to students who might otherwise interact with those centers. At the Makerspace, I ran a workshop on designing objects in 3D, which was done inside the VR headsets, and then the students were guided to then 3D print the designs that they made. Only thing I regret about that particular event was that we over-registered it. There were too many interested participants for everyone to get a turn, and we're really hoping to iterate on that the next time we can run it, probably in the fall. I also this spring brought the VR headsets to our Language and Culture Center and gave students who were thinking of studying abroad the opportunity to visit locations all across the globe and to discuss the pros and cons of a language learning app. Astutely, the participants who joined me in testing out the language learning app were able to point out the ways it was limited or flawed and how they might suggest changing the technology or advising people to use it. Our colleagues in these other campus departments have fabulous infrastructure for publicizing events and bringing students in, so being able to add the virtual reality element to that existing structure is something that's working really well. We're also incidentally learning the value of attracting students with a meal to these kind of events, which is something that our colleagues at the Language and Culture Center learned a long time before we did. Program number 5 is what occurs when I take the VR devices to class visits related to a specific topical application for a particular course. We have academic content installed on our headsets that interests a high-level biochem course that studies protein folding. So I enter into that course when it runs once a year in the fall. We also have an environmental studies course that discusses the medium of games that promote conservation, for which I'm collaborating with the professor in order to bring in some VR experiences that the students will then be able to complete and discuss together. These are short entries in these quite long and intensive classes. I'm usually only there for one class period, maybe not even the whole thing. The chance to connect these alternative expressions of important academic concepts to the work being done in the curriculum is an interesting and often mind-expanding moment for the students who participate. Last but not least, I'll talk about our 6th program, which is open hours with the devices. So we run these open hours about once a month throughout the semester to give students from across disciplines a chance to play with the technologies. We see a variety of students from various backgrounds trying out the tech. A number of the students who come will gleefully tell me this is the first time they've gotten to try out virtual reality. Some of our folks are repeat visitors who come again and again, so that is a spectrum as well. We've experimented with trying this event in both our library spaces and the campus center, given that we don't have a permanent location or lab for the VR equipment. Both of these options have pros and cons. We can transport our 2 MetaQuest headsets to the campus center, where a number of students study and they visit for our centralized dining, but not every application that we're used to offering at these open houses is compatible with the newer headsets, and there are some challenges in streaming VR from the newer MetaQuest 2s that we hadn't previously experienced with the Oculus Rift device, which we need to keep in the library building. Overall, between these programs, I've worked with dozens of students across this broad range of different contexts. Hopefully, I've left some of them with the confidence to explore virtual reality not as passive consumers, confronted with something mysterious, but as active participants engaging with an evolving platform in a way that makes sense for their individual perspectives. Another pause, another action item. What's an activity that you can use to bring students into the room and interacting with a VR device on their own terms? Do any of the programs that I listed strike you as something that you could put together, that you have the time for, that you would enjoy and find valuable on your own campus? When I put together these structured programs, I'm always thinking about how I can add in short, directed conversations on digital literacy topics as the students are holding the VR equipment, because that's the moment at which it really becomes visceral for them. I don't always have the same conversation with students, and often it's really dictated by what's going on in the moment and what comes up as they're starting to use the virtual reality equipment. But here are some examples of things to think about as far as mini conversations to have in your back pocket if you're looking to raise consciousness about these kinds of topics for students you work with. So, firstly, literally every time that I facilitate someone using virtual reality and they wear glasses, we end up talking about accessibility, whether it's explicitly stated that accessibility is what we're talking about, or it's just kind of understood if the word's not mentioned. I try to make the limitations of the technology, the plastic casing is not large enough for your glasses, as explicit as possible, and really clarify that these design trends that leave glasses wearers having difficulty with the equipment aren't a natural result of anything. It's simply a design trend, and that's the sort of consideration that should have more thought put into it in order to be more accessible for more people. So that's one aspect of what we might talk about. I'm also really careful to name what I'm doing whenever I'm assisting a user and to give them time to figure out new modes of interaction. And as I'm doing this, what I'm thinking about is the process of gaining digital literacy with a new mode like the virtual reality headset. So again, if you've ever worked with someone who's trying out VR for the first time, you'll know that the hand controls and their odd shape and their numerous buttons can be somewhat confusing to those of us who aren't acclimated to it. I try to, as much as I can, link the new usage to experiences that students may have had previously. So I do things like introducing the trigger button as equivalent to a mouse click, and I do use the word or phrase mouse click, helping to draw a parallel between this new activity, which they may be a little bit uncertain about, but with computer literacy, which I've gotten a feel for what the baseline of computer literacy is with our body of students, although it might be different depending on what kind of groups you're working with. So that's another aspect of connecting this new kind of literacy to something they might have a better grip on. An individual's comfort and facility with moving through virtual space and interacting with hand controls that have multiple degrees of freedom is another aspect of learning the best ways to interact with this tool. Some of that learning, some of that manipulating the controls can also be preempted with a handout about what the buttons on the controllers are and how to get started with them. But a lot of it has to happen at the pace that a user is comfortable with and just kind of in the moment. So in some ways, it can be helpful for students to watch their peers with their view broadcast on a display in the room and be able to kind of give commentary or give assistance from the sidelines. But in other ways, because the new task is so embodied, that learning needs to happen individually and in the moment for each person who's trying out the virtual reality technology. Moving back more towards higher level thinking, towards critical thinking and understanding of privacy and security, when students are using voice recognition that comes built into some VR apps, students can be prompted to think about how different speaking styles or abilities might be impacted by that technology. In the case of the collaboration I mentioned with the Language and Culture Center, we also had a conversation about why it was limiting that although the app could do some voice recognition, it didn't support input in different scripts. It was only expecting English as an input, although if you're searching for a place, that place's name might not be in English. When it comes to voice recognition, that also leads into segues about data tracking. So being able to articulate to students that if something is collecting your speech in order to do a search with it or do speech to text, being able to give them that grain of understanding that that means a recording is happening of that speech. That means their speech might be getting stored somewhere. Where is it being stored? Is it locally on this hardware? Is it on a server somewhere? What's the privacy like about that recording? How long is it kept? So we have made some very specific decisions about the ways that we enforce privacy on the virtual reality devices that we support for students, because of our responsibility towards their data. And so being able to segue from conversations about like, well, in order to use your voice that is making a recording of you, to what other sorts of data are being recorded, how are they stored, how can we know, what can we do about that? Those are all interesting conversations to start fostering among students as they get used to this new mode of interaction. Other things that come up are things like limitations of the screen display, battery life, the refresh rate of the device, all things like that. The realities of what we are capable with our current hardware can really illuminate what the boundaries are for creating in virtual reality and what the decisions are on the back end that the developers are making in order to produce the experiences that you as a user interact with. So giving a student a chance to understand that it's not an omnipotent, all-powerful creation engine going on, but that there's specific limitations and specific tools to build for virtual reality is a great way to bring them closer to understanding that it is everything they're looking at is made by a very particular set of human beings who they could learn from as they're observing these applications. In the workshops that I run that encourage students to try their hand at creating VR, we also end up talking about things like licensing and copyright for everything from images to sounds to 3D objects, some of which can be found open source on the internet, some of which have particular licensing restrictions, and this leads to librarians' all-time favorite topics around things like fair use and copyright and all of these questions that are brought to the fore whenever we're creating different kinds of digital media. And when it comes to the scientific applications that I demo for students in their courses, even in those moments when the students might be mostly focused on thinking about how is this protein interacting with another protein, being able to raise the idea that, this application was designed by a small team in a university setting, and that makes it different from an application that might have been designed by a larger team in a private setting, and being able to show them the visual differences between the two can once again really underscore this idea that everything that is made for a virtual reality system is mutable and changing and developed over time. Nothing is a given, and the students can kind of see the way they might interact with that ecosystem. With all of that in mind, which of these topics that I mentioned in the large umbrella of digital literacy are you already informed on? Which one of them would you be able to have an extemporaneous chat on with students on a level that assumes they're not experts but gives them a chance to open up their understanding? And where might you be interested in learning more in order to better illuminate what's going on in virtual reality for the people that you're facilitating for? To wrap up this presentation, I have a few concluding thoughts based on what's worked and what hasn't in the last couple of semesters doing this work. Number one, embrace playfulness. Because there is so much to cover in this field, it's really a useful strategy to allow what topics arise and go with the flow along with whatever students are thinking or asking or curious about. And I feel like a playful approach aligns really well with that. Number two, admit when you don't know. I do this all the time when I'm in a setting where I'm facilitating new users through virtual reality. Sometimes things won't work. Sometimes I don't know why the display won't connect or why their code won't create the scene that they think they want it to, and being able to say, I'm not sure, here's what I'm going to try, or I don't totally know, let's look it up in these couple of resources, is yet another moment when you're humanizing the work that goes into making these tools operate properly. Tip number three, perhaps the most important tip, find your allies. I spoke a couple of times about the work that I've done with other departments on campus, so professional staff and also students running organizations. Being able to get in a room with someone who is also excited about the virtual reality technology, also wants to connect their group or their students or their users with that technology, and wants to go hand in hand all in on you with making a workshop happen or an open house happen or something to that effect, it can be the most motivating sort of partnership that's out there. So being able to coordinate with the other folks on campus who have the excitement for what you're doing is going to be a win for you. I would really like to thank everyone who I've collaborated with on the Mount Holyoke campus and beyond over the course of the last few years getting these projects off the ground. I don't know what I would have done without my incredibly valuable colleagues, because this work takes more than one mind and more than one person for the inspiration. I also want to thank you all for joining me today to think about these discussions of demystifying, democratizing, and diversifying emerging technologies. There's no one right way to go about it, and I really do hope that I hear back from some of you who are watching today with your ideas and your own inspiration to further this work. Have a great rest of your experience at TLTcon.